So, thank you all for coming, and thanks Terrence and Robin for bringing your classes. So, when I initially wrote Dysphoria, I planned on publishing it under a pseudonym, and I had imagined something grand like Torrin Payne. And then my first publisher, who didn't end up being the publisher I went with, but that's another story. My first publisher really wanted me to write under my own name. So I went to my boss, Sally Moore, and I said, Sally, what am I going to do? I'm a mild-mannered English teacher and a good Lutheran girl at heart, and I'm about to publish this really slutty book under my own name. And Sally said, you know, it'll all be more scandalous if you try and hide it. So I have invited you here today, and I'm so flattered that you've come so that I can share it with you. I also went to my friend Paul Hawkwood in the English department, and I said to Paul, what am I going to do? I am a mild-mannered English teacher and a good Lutheran girl at heart, and I'm about to publish this slutty book under my own name. And Paul said, you do realize that you are an out lesbian English teacher who is afraid to come out of the closet as a writer. And that did make it all seem just a little bit silly. So, I have come here today to come out to you as a slutty Lutheran girl and to read to you just a little piece of my thriller. And I promise that this will be short. I had to choose a passage that was appropriate to read in the workplace. And that really narrowed down my options with this book. So don't worry, you're not going to be trapped here standing in the atrium for hours on end. So Dysphoria takes place in the Berkshires in western Massachusetts. It's a remote area, it's wooded, the buildings are old, and it takes place in this little isolated college. And right off the playing fields, right next to the campus, is a giant abandoned mental asylum, which is modeled after the giant abandoned mental asylum that was right off the rugby pitch at my college. So, lest you think I'm making this up. Our hero is Helen Ivers. She's the college president. She's just taken the job. She's a strong woman, but she is haunted by memories of her sister's gruesome suicide. And those memories become waking hallucinations as she tries to protect her campus from a serial killer, and at the same time tries to rescue what's left of her sanity. In the passage that I'm going to read to you today, she has gone back to the scene of the first murder to try and figure out what happened, but maybe more than that, just to try and figure out how the world could go so far wrong. And that's where we find her. Our hero is Helen, and her sister, deceased now a year, is named Eliza. The path Helen followed led past the main asylum to a cluster of outbuildings, no larger than park bathrooms. Most had lost their roofs. 2 were covered in ivy. She was about to turn around when something stopped her. A movement in the bushes behind one of the buildings. Just a flicker, a footstep. "Hello?" Helen called out. No one answered. Helen took a few steps forward. Every hair on her body raised a fraction of an inch. She saw nothing but a few remnants of asylum equipment. So rusted and overgrown, it was hard to imagine what function they'd served. Suddenly, the bushes before her exploded with movement. Helen screamed. Blood pounded in her ears like a drum. She turned to run. Then she looked up and caught her breath. Ducks, 4 ducks of a mottled black and white, had flown from the ivy, startled by her approach. They took off like passenger jets on a short runway, then landed a few meters away and waddled back in her direction. "I don't have anything for you," Helen's voice trembled. "You should be in the pond." She took a step forward. The pond. The word hung in the air. She heard wood cracking, then the sound of a door hitting a wall. For one sickening instant, she thought she had tripped. Then she was falling, helplessly falling. Helen's mind did not have time to conceptualize what happened. Only her body knew that she hit ice-cold water and went under. She had been drawing in a breath as she fell. Underwater, her chest convulsed, trying to expel the water, but each cough brought in more. She flailed, pulling herself upward. Something held her down. Her feet were trapped, her ankle wrapped in a death grip. There was no air. There was no air. "Help me, Helen, help me." It was Eliza. And Helen was back in the kitchen. The memory rushed into her mind like the water rushed into her lungs. She tried to push it away. Part of her knew she had only a minute to break the surface of the water or she would drown. But the memory held her down. She was staring at the floor, the blood. Eliza! Helen dropped her phone. Her phone! She had to call the hospital. "Help me!" Except she couldn't scream. The pain in her chest was excruciating. She kicked frantically. Her leg was still trapped. Her head expanded and she grew dizzy. She opened her eyes. The water was ultra clear. It didn't hurt anymore. She watched a trail of bubbles dance past her eyes. "I'm dying." Then the bubbles rushed down in a great column. A figure shot past her like an arrow, Poseidon with his trident. She felt her ankle release, then she was at the water's surface coughing. The pain in her lungs returned, along with the panic. She vomited mouthful after mouthful of water until her whole body was racked from exertion. At least she was breathing. Finally, her coughing subsided and her gasps became regular breaths. She was not swimming. Someone was holding her, treading water behind her. They were in a stone chamber, perhaps 10 feet by 10 feet. The chamber was entirely filled with water. Helen could not touch the bottom. Above them, a trapdoor hung open, letting in a shaft of blue sky. It was only 4 or 5 feet away, but there was no ladder, no ledge. The walls of the chamber were rough, but without footholds. There was no way to leap from the water to the sunlight. She had to get out. She began to struggle. Strong arms held her close. "Relax," her rescuer said. "I've got you. I've got you." An arm, like an iron band, encircled her waist. Her rescuer's legs pumped rhythmically, keeping them both afloat. The water around them felt warmer. The skin pressed against hers was hot. "Who are you?" Helen turned her head. Thank you. And just since we have a whole class of fiction writing students, and I should add some educational content to my slutty book, I'd take a couple questions if anyone has one.
Yeah. What inspired you?
I was inspired by a court case that my wife read when she was in law school. The first victim in this book suffers from something called body integrity identity disorder. It's a real disorder in which people very desperately wish the amputation of their own limbs. And so the twist in the book is that the first victim goes into this assault willingly and actually seeks it out. And my partner read a court case about this when she was in law school, and the question that was brought to the court's attention was, does someone have the right to amputate their own healthy limb? It was in Scotland, and the answer turned out to be no, because you were a soldier of the Queen, and you should not maim the Queen's property. But that was the first seed that got me thinking about this story.
Yeah. How old were you when you started writing?
When I was a very little girl, before I could write, I actually learned to read rather late. I didn't learn to read till I was in 3rd grade. But when I was little, my mom would set up a tape recorder for me, and I would record stories. And I still have those, so probably 3. And whenever I couldn't think of what to say in my story, I would say, and then there was a silence. Which actually works really well in fiction. I recommend it, just there was a silence. Almost any scene, you can amp up the tension with a little silence.
So what is your definition then of thriller, and how did those books that you read fit that? I mean, why did you decide on those as? Because there's a lot of things that are called, anything that's thrilling could be a thriller. What was your...
So I found the most helpful definition that I found was from a blog post. Someone had cataloged all the things that people have said about thrillers and mysteries. And basically it comes down to this, the excitement of a mystery is an intellectual challenge as you try and figure out who the killer is before the detective or the hero. Whereas in a thriller, the excitement is that your hero is in physical danger, and you don't know if they're going to get butchered at the end of the book or not. Well, of course, you kind of assume not, but so the physical danger is what makes the thriller exciting. You could easily know the identity of the killer at the very beginning of a thriller. You don't in this one, but you could. And the thrill is finding out if they get out of the well outside the asylum. And also they said that in a thriller you are more likely to have character development. So your character can go from a weak, shell-shocked person at the beginning of the story, as Helen is in this book, to a very strong and confident person at the end. Whereas in a mystery, you can have someone who goes through no character development whatsoever. Sherlock Holmes is Sherlock Holmes in the first book and the last book. He doesn't change a lot. He doesn't grow as a person. That's not what you're in it for. So I like the thriller because it had that room for character development. Not that you can't have that in a mystery too, but the thriller almost demands it.
What advice would you give to beginning authors?
Oh, well, first of all, I would just say to keep at it. Let the thought of stopping or failing be completely foreign to your mind. So I have so many rejection letters. I've got a whole binder. I should have brought it with me. Pay no attention to that. Those don't count. They're just, they are like proof that you've worked hard. If anyone who builds things or sews or makes or harvests knows there's always a pile of scrap when you're done. That's the rejection letters. And then the other thing I would encourage people to do is to try as many different genres as you can. We all have a genre that we like, that we feel most comfortable in. And for me, that genre was always literary fiction of a very sensitive, spiritual, gentle nature. And I still love that. And I hope to have a book of that type coming out in the fall this year. But moving into the thriller, which was completely out of my comfort zone, was really fun, and I actually learned a whole bunch about myself, including the fact that my friends would still like me even when they found out I wasn't quite such a good Lutheran girl at heart. So that would be my recommendation. Don't give up. Yeah.
Did you base the character off your own personality at all?
No, there's only one character in my whole experience as a fiction writer who is based off a real person, and that's actually Helen Ivor's secretary, who is Jeremy Cornforth, my secretary downstairs. There's no question about it. I didn't try and hide it. I told him. He's right in there, right down to his his purple Bluetooth that he's always wearing. But other than that, no, everyone is entirely fictional.
Jeremy going to give me residuals off that?
I'll have my people talk to his people. Yeah.
How much writing have you done before you decided to write this novel?
I had finished a memoir, a book of literary fiction, and this was my third book, and a handful of poems, but not a lot, and one short story. Yeah.
What are your writing habits like? How often do you write a day?
So I try to write every day, or almost every day, and I try and put in between 8 and 15 hours a week. So I'll get up at 6, and I'll write till, say, 8, and then rush and get dressed and get ready and go off to work. And then sometimes put in another hour or so in the evening, sometimes put in a couple hours in the weekend. And of course, I'm fortunate to be a college professor and have the summers off. And in that time, I write like a full-time job. I write about 40 hours a week. Yeah.
How much time do you spend reading compared to writing?
I spend a lot more time writing. It's my dirty secret. I'm not as well-read. I'm pretty well-read, but I don't read as much as I think I should. I have to make a concerted effort to remember to have a couple books going at any time. So yeah, that's something I need to work on. Yeah.
Do you outline often, or are you more free form, just sit down and write it out and then edit it later?
I do a lot of outlining, and I outline on index cards so that I can shift them around, move the plot points around. And then once I get a little farther on in the process, I put all the plot points on Post-it notes in my office at home. And so the plot starts by the door to the office, and it goes all the way around, about 3/4 of the way around the room, and then the next project starts on the next wall. So if you go to my blog, which is at Tumblr, I think it's karelia.tumblr.com or tumblr.karelia.com. If you Google me, it comes right up. And I've got lots of pictures of my outlining process on the walls. It's a great way to do it, too. If you've got just a little bit of private space in your life where you can put up your ideas, it really is a wonderful way to visualize and to have the whole story immediately visual in one glance. You don't have to open a file, you don't have to go through cards, you don't have to read an outline. It's all there, one snapshot. Let's see, I'll take 1 or 2 more questions and then we'll have some cake and coffee. Yeah, Aaron.
With all the psychiatry and everything, how much studying and research did you have to do while writing?
I've been fascinated by psychology ever since I was, I think, in 6th grade. Almost majored in psychology. I was afraid of the math, otherwise I would have been a psychiatrist. That's the true story. But no regrets, because this is the best job in the world. But I've read a lot about mental health care, about mental illness, and I read at least 5 additional books for this project. One that I found really interesting and eye-opening is Mad in America. The author's name is Whitaker. And he definitely has a perspective. This is not an unbiased presentation of both sides of the issue. But if you're interested in the history of mental health care treatment, it is a fascinating read and pretty grim.
Could you give us an explanation or maybe a sneak peek as to why you keep referring to your book as slutty?
Oh. It's the sex. All right. Wonderful questions. Why don't we have some cake and coffee? Thank you.
Books are for sale right over there after that last part.